All right, let's talk about ancient poetry. But I want you to just forget everything you think you know, okay? Forget the dusty scrolls, forget the rigid rules, because we're about to uncover a full-blown artistic rebellion that basically turned the classical literary world on its head.
No, really. Think about it for a second. What's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it these huge, sprawling epics about gods and wars, serious-looking authors writing for the glory of the state? A world where tradition is everything and the rules are set in stone? Yeah, I thought so. Just hold that thought.
For the longest time, that's been the standard picture, right? That the classics are this untouchable, super serious tradition. And it's an image that's been baked in by centuries of academic study, giving us this one very specific, very formal version of the ancient world.
But what if that whole story is missing the best part? What if, hiding inside that very formal tradition, there was this powerful counterculture, a movement of artistic revolutionaries who just looked at the establishment and said, yeah, we're going to do something else?
So this is the showdown we're talking about. On one side, you've got the literary establishment. We're talking massive state-sponsored epics, this feeling that all art has to serve some big public purpose, and you absolutely have to follow the rules. But on the other side, a whole new wave of poets who loved short, personal, witty poems. They cared about individual feelings and, more than anything, they demanded creative freedom.
So, where did this all kick off? Well, our story starts back in Hellenistic Greece, with a poet who had pretty much become the poster boy for this entire movement. The absolutely brilliant and totally defiant Callimachus.
Okay, so in Callimachus's world, bigger was always better. The gold standard for literature was the gigantic epic poem, the kind used to celebrate kings and empires. But Callimachus, he just wasn't interested in following the crowd. He deliberately turned his back on that grand style to create something totally new.
And this right here is his big revolutionary idea, all wrapped up in one Greek word, leptotis. It literally translates to slenderness. And for Callimachus, this wasn't just about writing shorter poems, it was a whole artistic philosophy. It was about choosing precision over excess, intellectual wit over some big, loud, dramatic performance. So instead of a 10,000-line epic, he'd craft this perfect, tiny poem where every single word had a job to do.
And see, this is why it was so much more than just a style. It was basically a political statement. As Daniele Spernis' research points out, when Callimachus talked about his slender muse, he was making a huge declaration. He was planting a flag for artistic independence, pretty much rejecting the idea that a poet's job was to serve anybody's agenda but their own.
Now, an idea this good doesn't just stay in Greece. Our story now jumps over to Rome, where this rebellious spirit finds its most passionate and, honestly, most famous champion, the poet Catullus.
And look, if Callimachus had it tough, Rome was a whole other level of difficult. Roman society was built on the mos maiorum, the ways of the ancestors. Tradition ruled everything. And art was supposed to have utilitas. It had to be useful to the state. So, how on earth could a poetry all about personal feelings and little witty observations possibly survive here?
You can almost trace the journey of the idea, right? First, Callimachus kicks things off with his slender style. Then Catullus finds his work over in Rome, and he doesn't just copy it, he Romanizes it, giving it the new name lepos. And then he turns it into his weapon of choice to push back against the stuffy traditions of his time.
And this is so important. Lepos was way more than just the Latin word for charm or slenderness. For Catullus and his friends, it became a kind of code word. It was a signal that you preferred sophisticated Greek culture over Roman seriousness, that you valued individualism over the group, and that you chose a life of personal passion over public duty. It wasn't just a style, it was a whole lifestyle.
So what exactly was he taking on? Oh, basically everything that mattered in Rome. He challenged the mos maiorum, the sacred customs of the ancestors. He completely defied utilitas, that demand for art to be useful. He even thumbed his nose at the Roman ideal of respectable leisure time. His poetry, full of love affairs, dirty jokes, and personal heartbreak, was a direct attack on all of it.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just a story about two superstar poets. Far from it. Turns out, Callimachus and Catullus were actually riding a much, much bigger cultural wave, one that modern research is really just starting to get a handle on.
Yeah, a scholar named Tim Whitmarsh really pushes us to look beyond that traditional aristocratic list of greats. He argues that focusing on just a few famous authors gives us a totally warped picture. Think about it. Rome was expanding.
The Greek-speaking world was all interconnected, so you had way more cultural mixing, new audiences, and a real hunger for different kinds of stories. The whole literary scene was just exploding with diversity.
And that means the literary world was actually packed with stuff we rarely hear about. There were popular novels for a new reading public, there were these wild imaginative stories, Greco-Jewish writings that blended different traditions, and you started hearing voices from way outside the usual elite circles. The rebellion of Callimachus and Catullus wasn't some random event. It was the high art version of a huge, widespread hunger for new, personal, and diverse ways of telling stories.
Okay, so let's tie this all together. We've seen a Greek trailblazer and a Roman disciple, both fighting for a totally new kind of poetry. But what does it all really mean for us today?
I mean, why should we care about a 2,000-year-old argument over poetic style? Well, because it was never, ever just about poetry.
When you get right down to it, the story of Callimachus and Catullus is really the story of every artist who's ever pushed back against the way things are. It's this powerful reminder that the fight for creative freedom, for the right to express your own personal truth against what the state or tradition demands, that isn't a modern thing. It's a fundamental, timeless human struggle.
And that really leads to one last thought. If this entire, rich history of artistic defiance was just hiding in plain sight for so long, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stories, what other hidden rebellions are still out there, just waiting for us to look past the official version of history?